At the beginning of the 13th round of the Candidates Tournament, Sergei Karjakin and Fabiano Caruana were sharing the lead. I mean, it really couldn't be closer. Of course, this was the penultimate round. We're getting to the finishing stages. So let's take a look at how they both fared today. First of all, Sergei Karjakin playing black here against Svidler and Aronian. And it was an English, in fact he went into a reversed Sicilian type of position. And Aronian here with the white pieces has achieved a lot. Pieces looking very harmoniously placed. Major pieces on the queen side. It's a typical Sicilian position really. He now played bishop e1. So just uncovering the attack of the rook through the knight down to the pawn on b7. He's got the two bishops, got a nice structure, rooks are working well. Now, in order to hold black's position, you might think c6 would be a good move to cover the knight. Well, I think the problem is it leaves that square weakened, and I think there is a pretty obvious exchange sacrifice here. And then knight d6 is the kind of thing that Aronian would do with the blink of an eye. It looks very promising. Uncovers the bishop's diagonal towards the knight. That pawn is on prise. Possibilities sometimes to play c6 or maybe taking on b7 first. Very difficult position for black. So, well, Karjakin took on a3, which looks inviting, but actually there's a tactical problem with this. White can now play c6. Of course, that pawn can't be taken because you take the rook with check, and taking here would allow white to take that queen there, and this knight is going to be in trouble. And let's go back. So basically in this position black has to play the queen to the side, queen e7, which also protects the knight, and the knight attacks the queen. So the queen moves here, and now pawn takes pawn, and rook takes c6. Now the problem for black is that this knight is looking a little bit stranded. Of course that knight is threatened as well. So bishop f7 protects the knight, and now rook c5, and now you can see that cuts off the queen's defence. So white is now threatening simply to take this knight. And it's a little bit problematic for black. Maybe an obvious move to save the piece is to play rook b3. And I can imagine many players doing this actually. Because after this, well, material is still level, and you can play c6, and that will allow the knight just to come back here. The problem is that basically black's structure, I mean this is a pretty ugly pawn. White has the two bishops, and this is a good move, and this forces an exchange, and white can even go straight from an endgame like this. Now many people might think, well, it should be able to hold it equal material, but I think this would be a gift for Aronian. He would love to play this. Got a solid pawn structure, perfect pawn structure, chances to play against that weakened pawn, two bishops, you might put the king in the middle, play f4. This is unpleasant for black. Instead, Karjakin played very boldly. He played knight takes pawn, so uncovering the bishop's attack on the queen. So Aronian took a piece, an exchange of rooks, and then Karjakin exchanged off that important bishop. So Aronian is a piece up, but Karjakin is now fighting. First of all, this pawn is very strong, a3. The queen went down, and Aronian recovered a pawn, and queens were exchanged. Okay, so it's only one pawn for the piece, but that's a strong pawn. But it's more than that actually. In taking off this bishop, and also isolating that pawn, in fact positionally, things have turned in Karjakin's favour, curiously. So the light squares are weak, You can see there's a threat straight away to play pawn to f5. Well, Aronian deals with that. Bishop c3, that's important. So you can't queen straight away. That is a problem, of course. This would be fatal. You can get a queen, but there's a back rank. So a few tactics to negotiate. So the bishop came all the way back to g8, and that means that pawn is solidly protected. But white stopped that, and now black gets counterplay. Now that pawn is not going through. There's no way you can queen the pawn. Aronian has that covered, but he's managed to generate enough play, and suddenly that pawn is going. Now, in this position, rook had to go back. So actually, white to some extent has consolidated, but it is very difficult for white to make progress here when you have to constantly look out for that pawn, and also there are no real weaknesses in black's kingside. And Aronian tried very hard and came close, but he didn't manage to win. And with cold-blooded and patient defence, Karjakin actually secured a draw. But that was a critical moment. Okay, let's switch over to Caruana against Svidler. Now this was a really close game, a very, very complicated, confusing middle game where Caruana played very boldly and managed to reach an endgame where he was a pawn up. So this is Caruana's big chance. If he could win this game, of course, he'd be alone in the lead. So this is the position after 59 moves. Svidler struggling away with the defence with black. He now played a very surprising move. He took the pawn here, and at first glance this looks crazy because the white rook looks like it's going to take this pawn, and then two pawns will be too much. Svidler gave a check, and the king came backwards. Now if black keeps checking, then the king is just going to hide here, and everything is fine for white there. The rook can take the pawn. But that wasn't Svidler's idea. He played the rook back. Now of course, after the rook comes back, the bishop and rook are threatening to take that pawn. So now white has to take. So white is 2 pawns up. Now if white consolidates, he's winning. But here's Svidler's idea. The king came round, and that rook is kind of trapped. Well, it can escape, of course, but when it does escape this way, then black will recover one of those pawns, and that'll be a draw. King up. Now here is a funny moment, because black can, Svidler waited here with rook h5. Black can play king b7 and push the rook away straight away. But watch what happens. Svidler was short of time, and perhaps wasn't. Well, he wasn't that short of time, but maybe he was slightly concerned about this variation. There's still a lot to calculate. So obviously if the rook moves away from protecting the bishop, then that's lost. So the rook comes here, and the king moves across again. And the rook has run out of squares. In fact, this is still a draw. After bishop takes, now if king takes, bishop d2 check, you take the rook and the king takes the pawn. So you check first, and then you take the rook. Now maybe Svidler gave up at this point and thought, well, this is probably losing. In fact, black is able to take that last pawn and bishop c5, and you take here. Or if the rook defends laterally, then the bishop comes around this way, and again you can take that pawn. Now that's a theoretical draw. Still a bit of work to do, but you should be able to draw it. But instead, Svidler chose to play here. He waited. Now again, if the king comes up, then the king pushes away the rook, and that really is a dead draw. You can't attack this rook. But Caruana getting confused. Caruana played c5. This is his last chance. So the king threatens to come in to protect everything, and white will be winning. But the king pushes the rook away, and then he took the pawn. which forces this endgame, rook and bishop against rook. Now this is a theoretical draw, but when you're short of time, they were playing on the increment now, they got 30 seconds per move, then this is still a hard task to hold. Let me just show you the basic idea of how black does this. So obviously rook exchange will be a draw. Svidler went for this so-called second rank defence very straight away, and here's the idea. Rook b7. Now this looks really passive, but there's a trick. After king c6, threatening rook mate, it looks fatal. In fact, you have rook c7. This is the trick. It's stalemate after you take the rook. That's the basic defence. And if you check, and checking actually achieves nothing, the king just comes back again, and because the rook is here, well, this rook has to move again. Now, Caruana continued here and fiddled around and actually got somewhere and managed to shift Svidler from this second rank defence, but still Svidler kept his head and held the game, and after 50 moves they had to agree a draw. So, well, incredibly tense round, very long. That game went to well over 100 moves, like 116 moves, and well over 7 hours. So it went, yeah. So with one round still to go, Caruana and Karjakin share the lead with 7.5 points. Anand is half point behind. He drew today with Giri, but he can't win. Even if they're all tied tomorrow, it'll be, well, Caruana would win on tiebreak then. But basically, in the last round, Karjakin plays Caruana. I mean, it couldn't be set up for a better finish. Karjakin plays Caruana. Karjakin with the white pieces. If it's a draw, and they're alone sharing first place, Karjakin will win on tiebreak. If Anand joins them by beating Svidler, then Caruana would win on tiebreak. And of course, if either Karjakin or Caruana wins, then they would win the tournament. So it's still, everything is possible, but all we know is this: either Karjakin or Caruana will win the tournament tomorrow. Do join me tomorrow, and I'll let you know what happens. Thanks for watching.